thank you very much for inviting me into your wonderful city of Bangalore. What I'd like to really spend the next half hour discussing with you is some trends that we've found, again through surveys that we've just simply completed with the Vanson Board organisation. And my introduction has just changed. And the introduction has changed because I've just heard what Mac has said, and I've just heard a couple of questions. And it's almost as if the gods have given me a perfect segue. Because the survey that we carried out and what I'm going to discuss with you now blends perfectly between Mac and those particular questions. So to you, Mac, and to the questioners, thank you very much for the introduction. So in the next half hour, what I want to do is to discuss how the collaboration between the end customer and the service provider is paramount in the success of any outsourced contract and any project. And how that the business case that is raised by the CIO and the project owner must be realized at the end of the project. The idea must be realized. Because let's have a think about what actually happens when someone builds a piece of software. First of all, they identify an opportunity. They have to consider what that opportunity is. They have to bring together some ideas. And then they have to go through some sort of process to get a realized advantage. That's what we do. In the IT industry, what we do is to help the CIOs realize their idea. And what we've found at the moment is that there is a trend towards the software supply chain. And that's where that the end client is very focused on maintaining control over the practices and processes that create value to them. And value to the end client, value to the CIO, is specifically focused around getting their opportunity realized as an advantage. But what we've also realized is that the outsourcers are now becoming far more accountable. So let's see what that actually means. Oops, wrong button. There we go. So in this survey that we carried out, and that was completed in October of this year, the survey was towards 600 CIOs worldwide. And what we did was that we asked them specific questions about their business. And what we found is that right now, about 48% of testing and development projects are outsourced. And the CIOs are predicting that there's going to be about a 15% increase over the next 2 years. Now that sounds fairly healthy. We actually thought that it was a little low. But 15% growth isn't too bad. However, there's always a however, 31% of the CIOs believe that the outsourced projects that they have are actually in trouble because of the SLAs are not being met and that there are time pressures and time issues on their outsourced projects. And they believe that 23% fail due to the final requirements not being met. The really critical thing that we found here was that the CIOs said that with these 30% failures, they believe that these failures actually had a negative impact on their job prospects. So this is now becoming personal. And you can imagine that when a CIO is threatened then things have to change. And what we realized is that 55% believe that the main reason for the failure was due to the outsourcers of the projects having too many changes of the requirements during the project itself. Now, that's reasonably difficult. I might learn to use this button. How about that? There we go. But the huge problem that we realized out of this is that 37% feel that they do not have visibility or control over the changes that are happening through their processes, through the actual outsourced project. And even more alarming is that 81% of the 600 respondents believe that they were not communicating their requirements correctly across the whole of the SDLC and across the entire development outsourced practice. I mean, they are significant numbers. So we all know what the SDLC looks like. Starts with design, ends with business as usual. And depending upon what your outsourced organization does or what your insourced organization does, you do one part of that SDLC. And yet there are problems that are going on all the way through this. Now, the report, Mac, that you were thinking of was the Standish Chaos report. Interestingly, that particular report has been showing the same trend since 1998. We are not learning. It's just the same. And what is the same? There are unsatisfied customers. There's scope creep. There's rework. And rework is a significant cost to any project. And rework can be directly attributed to poor requirements, which then affects the project delays. We recognize that during the build cycle there's inflexible schedules. There's the inability for certain organizations, certain parts of the development life cycle to change quickly. Now, if you're in an agile organization, then agile believe, and I believe, change is good. Change should be embraced. But if you happen to be in a somewhat agile process or a waterfall project, change is very bad because the processes and the practices are not geared and not capable of reacting to the change. And a lot of that is directly related to a lack of insight into what is actually happening through the development cycle. Performance problems. 3 years ago, a performance SLA could be set at a mark, and I won't give a number. Today, that mark is significantly different. And the reason it's significantly different is that you all are using smartphones, you're using tablets, you're online all the time, and you are getting great responses. The fact that the applications that you are using are quite simple, and therefore the data transfer is minimized, is irrelevant to the end user, because the end user experience is instantaneous. And as a direct result of that, the expectations for enterprise applications are now moving further and further forward. So performance development and performance testing starts in development. Miscommunication and risk to reputation. These are all of the issues that are happening through the development life cycle. So these projects today are very dynamic. But what we're finding is that the impact to the business is cost, complexity, confusion, and delays. So even though the SDLC, as we traditionally know it, offered a great deal, regardless of whether you were running from Agile or Waterfall, it's simply just not working. So there needs to be a change. And so what we need to do is, before we consider the change, is let's address the concerns of the CIOs. Because the CIOs are the people who sign the contracts that say, yes, the project goes ahead. So it is paramount that we address their issues. Number one, they need clear and accurate requirements that reflect the business needs of their stakeholders. Because when the project is actually delivered, the stakeholders are the ones who will determine whether or not it is a successful project or not. The stakeholders must be involved right up front. Secondly, there cannot be any confusion to the outsourcer's understanding of what the business need is. These requirements must be transmitted in a very clear, concise, and understandable way right through the whole of the development life cycle. So everybody is working on the same roadmap. And stability and appropriate change. What does that actually mean? Appropriate change means that we know that projects will change on the way through. But let's do appropriate change, a change that actually reflects the business need. And then the visibility. The CIOs want visibility into the practices and the processes of projects. Now, I'm just going to digress for a tick because it's quite important here to have a look at how the tools have been supporting the SDLC all the way through, from about 2000, roughly. In about 2000, everybody was going out and buying point solutions. Let's buy best of breed for automation, for performance, for test management, for requirements. Let's buy the best for those. Because we have isolated teams that are going to do those work, and then they'll pass it off somehow. Then around about 2005, a couple of the larger organizations then said, no, no, no. You have to have an ALM solution, a large platform where all of the processes work from the beginning and it follows all the way through to business as usual. And good idea, excellent idea. But the issue that we have here is that when you put in an ALM solution into a very large organization, let's take finance, into a banking organization, the projects that are established to do work have to go and buy the licenses from their own procurement organization. And the licenses from procurement are expensive. So the project owners, having a project budget, thought, why don't we go out and buy something like Jira on the company credit card, and then we don't have to go and buy that project, that very large ALM project that's out there. Or let's go and get some open source for our project. So what's happened since about or around the 2010 mark through now is that large organizations who have these large ALM solutions are not fully utilizing them because the projects don't want to utilize them because they're too expensive. So they're going and buying their own. Now we find ourselves in a similar situation to 2010, where you had the point solutions. What we now predict, and this is again coming from the survey, from the Vanson-Borland survey, is that the software that needs to be in place for the software supply chain, number one, has to be actively collaborative. In other words, it needs to communicate with end users at the front and at the back and communicate with other software. It has to be able to live in a homogeneous environment, and it's got to be value for money. So there is going to be a shift in the way that software is actually procured, used, and desired by the end user community. So let's have a look. What is this software supply chain? Well, most organizations have some form of software supply chain. They have their teams, their development teams, their testing teams, their BA units, either in-house, or they've got them through third-party service providers. Generally speaking, they are across multiple locations. And these suppliers of services are working to one end goal. It's a bit like building a motor car. Someone has a great idea about the motor car. They build the motor car from components that are supplied by a whole series of different companies. One thing we have noticed, though, is that the CIOs are not willing to give up the idea. In other words, where the BAs sit. They're quite happy to give up the rest, but not the idea management. So if we look at this particular SDLC, on the left-hand side, the define and design, that's really where the value creation happens. And that's what the CIOs want to maintain. They see a break, a split in the SDLC from value creation and execution. Value creation is what they want to maintain and can keep control of. They want to own their value. They want to own their ideas. They want to own the IP relating to the projects that they're developing. They want to refine their ideas, and then they want to be able to communicate that back down to the suppliers, the outsourcers, the suppliers, the teams. And they want to be able to do this in a very cost-effective way, which may mean that the supply chain to the development of the life cycle, to the software, may in fact come from multiple outsourcers who are doing multiple different tasks in that execution phase. They believe that they have to maintain visibility all the way through the execution phase. And they also recognize that those suppliers need to be very accountable for the work that they are actually providing. Accountable to the other suppliers and accountable back to the idea, to the value creation. There needs to be this needs to be able to be balanced with speed of delivery and visibility and control. So if you have a look at the stakeholders who are involved in the software supply chain, underneath the value creation, we have the executives, we have the analysts, and we have the stakeholders, the end users. Under the execution phase, we've got the partners, the third party, the multiplicity of different suppliers, the developers, the testers. The customer has to come back into here, as does the end client. Not forgetting distribution and maintenance, because the project does not finish at the time of deployment. Business as usual is a cost factor to the CIO that needs to be taken into consideration. So if you have a look at this, we've broken it down into 3 areas. One is create. The create part is really looking at the value creation. It's the collaboration, it's the reference point. This is where all of the contributors need to be part of the process. This is where the idea needs to be taken to a point which can be easily finished by people understanding what is moving forward and making sure that that original idea is what is carried forward. Underneath the execution phase, we see two parts. We see the validation and we see delivery. Validation is where testing sits. And validation is not just testing, it's managing change, it's managing variety. And it's managing the changing focus of the project. Agile and agile requirements. Oh, I could go on forever. I've only got 10 minutes, so I can't. But there is a story. How you manage business requirements into an agile process. It's difficult, but it's doable. So how do you communicate the change and how do you manage that consistently? There needs to be a consistent set of practices and processes. And how do you make sure that you plan to deliver at a reasonable, planned, paced cost? Now, under delivery, which is really where you're looking at specification and standards, scheduling and quality, this is where you need to make sure that there is an understanding of how long it's going to take for each one of the suppliers. And can the suppliers mesh neatly? Because there's no point in having the windscreen arrive before the car is ready for the windscreen to be delivered and inserted. Let's get just-in-time delivery. And how do we understand when the project is complete? What was the end user? What were their quality specifications which says, if you reach this, then that's a project for us ready to go forward? How many testing organizations actually know what the end user's expectation of a completed project is? So we see creation, validate, and delivery working across the creation of value and execution. Well, what we're looking at now is looking at trying to understand a foundation for collaboration and create and innovate and track ideas. To be able to test and increase the quality through visibility and validation, and be able to manage the change effectively and deliver applications on time, on budget. And you might find this quite strange coming from someone who represents a tools company. But the software supply chain says any tool, any process, any location, so long as there is communication and collaboration between the tools, the processes, and the locations. I've got a whole bunch of slides here, which I'm not going to go through because I'm running out of time. But there is a series of points here which go through all the various different areas of defects, limitations, quality cycles which are being too long, and then getting into how do you work with agile discussions. If you're interested in it, come and talk to me later, because I can go on forever. What we need to do is to look at this software supply chain in two halves. What is the business advantage, and how is that advantage realized? So it's really about realizing an idea, the need for compliant results, and customer satisfaction, stakeholder satisfaction. And from that, you get the congruence of an idea through to a business-as-usual result. You need to have a single repository for this. How that is manifested, that is an arguable point. But all of that information has to come back from those disparate tools, any tool, anywhere, any location. That information needs to come back to a central area which can be managed for business as usual, if nothing else. So my last slide before questions. The CIOs are looking at value creation. And to do that, they need clear and accurate requirements that can be described and communicated through the execution chain. They need to be confident that every single supplier in the execution chain understands what success means from the end user's perspective. They need stability. Yes, change is there, but how do we do that? And how do we make that appropriate change? And the visibility into practice and into process. Practice and process, I keep saying, it's not just processes and it's not just practices. It's the combination of the two. So with that, I'll open up to the floor to questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. Round of applause. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the lady at the, Rakesh, please hand over the mic. If you may please stand up, madam. Introduce yourself with your name and company.
My name is Gayatri and I'm from Accenture.
Thank you.
The question is with customers going in for shorter delivery timelines and cycles, moving towards agile, what do you think is going to be the product life management, the ELM for how is that going to be looking at in future for products and tools? Because you said you're going in for tools which are open source, Jira and other stuff which is not going to a regular ELM.
Yep, that's a very, very good question. How do we know what tools are going to be, how are the tools going to work? Okay. Firstly, come to the ball and stand and I'll show you how Calibre works, but that's an ad and I'll keep that one to one side. But the tools, particularly from the requirements space, where the ideas are captured, ideas management, those tools need to be able to link specifically back out to agile plan and track tools. So the BA needs to be able to write the business rule, the business goal, then decompose that business goal down into some high-level functional requirements, not getting into feature-driven detail, and then to be able to seamlessly link into the Agile Plan and Track tool, so that the BA actually can either write the user stories or see the user stories that are developed by the product owner, and to be able to link, physically link, those user stories back to the high-level business requirement. That's only part of it. What they then must be able to do is to see the changing status of the user stories as they move from backlog into sprints. Tasks are associated to the user stories, and they then move from in progress through the various different states of the development cycle. It is fundamental that all of those tools, which are the transition of idea through the development cycle, are linked. They must be. If you are using siloed requirements, siloed knowledge tools that don't have the ability to link and to be able to give traceability, a traceable view right through the development cycle, then the software supply chain doesn't work. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. Okay. One last question from the gentleman here.
Hi. This is Ramchandran from Polaris. I really see the value behind what you have talked about, the value creation, when you talked about create, deliver, and then validate the three components, and also some sub-components around that. But can you please suggest how to measure the value creation, what you talked about, in terms of quantifying to the CIO, so this is the value creation I'm going to do at the beginning of the project, and at the end of the project, what I have done against my, the target which I have set in the beginning, and how far we are able to achieve that. Is there any model to calculate and to arrive at the end results?
Okay. Now, I think I got that. So, how do we measure the validation phase? Not only through the creation, but also the delivery phase. That's a really good question, because the validation must be, in other words, the test cases, regardless of whether they are manual tests, functional tests, performance tests, they need to be directly linked and reportable back to the requirement or the user stories or the idea. There needs to be traceability across all of those tiers, including back into the development cycle. So the easiest way to identify that you've got that visibility is that at the front, the business analyst should be able to see not only the user stories and where they are from a process state, but they also should be able to see all of the tests and the state of those tests. Have they passed? Have they failed? How many tests are associated with this one particular requirement? What's the history of the pass-fail rate? Which means to do that, you need to have a true test management system that overarches the validation phase. That test management system must have the capability to work in a homogeneous environment. In other words, it must have open integration back into the requirements phase so that they're not just using Calibre, which would be a good idea for requirements. Maybe they're using Rally. Maybe they're using TFS. Maybe they're using Greenhopper. And then as they're doing the tests and they're going through the defect cycle, those defects need to be able to be captured in Bugzilla, Jira, TFS, StarTeam, whatever tool that you particularly want. So test management is fundamental. Managing the results from the various different tools, the automation tools that are involved, whether that be performance, functional, or mobile, those results need to be accumulated in one spot, and the front end and the back end need to be able to be traced all the way through. It's possible, and it will have to happen for this supply chain to work effectively. Okay?
Thank you.